Solomon was a young man when he became the king of Israel, taking over for his father David. In a dream, God offered the young king anything he wanted. Rather than riches, fame, or success, Solomon asked for wisdom because he wanted to take his responsibility as a king seriously. He wanted to rule well and know how to make right decisions. The Bible tells us that God was so pleased with this choice that he granted Solomon not only this wish, but also all of the things he could have asked for but didn't, riches and honor, but with a solemn reminder to always use what he'd been given to do the right thing. While Solomon did become a very wise king, he also struggled to live in harmony with his own wisdom. He was a mixed bag, and the story in the book of 1 Kings shows us the high and low points. On the good side, he was a master of philosophy, poetry, and songwriting, a man of science, art, economics, politics, and theology. People traveled from foreign nations to listen to him lecture on all kinds of topics. But Solomon also had deep flaws. He had over 700 wives and 300 concubines, many of them from political alliances with foreign kingdoms. Not only was this immoral in its own right, but he also allowed these connections to other nations to lead him into worshiping foreign gods, turning his back on his covenant with Israel's God. One of Solomon's biggest investments and accomplishments in his early years as king was to build a temple for God in Jerusalem. But 1 Kings 5:13-16 tells us that in doing this, Solomon also used upwards to 180,000 slaves. This abusive choice was a contradiction to the holy purpose that the temple would serve, and ultimately God allowed this temple to be destroyed generations later. The Bible boldly shows us both the best and worst of this wise fool of a king. Solomon started out with a lot of promise, but ended up making a mess of his life, harming lots of people, and he provoked a chain of events that would eventually split the nation of Israel into two. While he held more power and influence than most of us do today, we may still see mirror reflections of our own selves in this man, who at times was his best self and at other times his worst. Just like Solomon, we sometimes fail to live up to the calling that God has chosen us for. While there is grace for our failures, it is also important to remember that God chooses people for a purpose. God chose Israel and the line of David to bring about his blessing for the whole world. Ultimately, while this son of David failed to fulfill all of God's purposes, another descendant of David would succeed in being the true wise king in every way. Jesus is the true leader whose wisdom never gave way to foolishness.